Hi, I'm Becky Draper. My sister once shoved me off stage and said, "This isn't for failed musicians." Mom didn't flinch, just laughed and told the others I was being dramatic. They erased me from the family photo. They told people I didn't exist, at least not the version of me that mattered. I wrote a song with my dying father, and they gave it her name. But when I played that song, the second chord made the entire room go silent. So tell me, how do you survive in a family that decides you're disposable? And how do you take your voice back when they never let you speak to begin with? The sidewalk outside the Legacy Music Hall felt colder than it should have been for a spring evening in New Jersey. The kind of chill that didn't belong to the weather, but clung to your bones anyway. I stood at the far end of the block, half hidden behind a crooked tree that had grown too tall for its square of soil. My eyes locked on the golden lights glowing inside the hall, where people were already gathering. Some in gowns, others in sleek suits, all laughing that careful, practiced laugh people use when they know they're being watched. I wasn't on the list. Not that I expected to be. The board outside read, Haynes Legacy Gala, a night of music and memory. Beneath the title were the names of contributors, family members, and organizers. Valora's name appeared twice, once as executive director, again as musical curator. Our mother, Isolde Haynes, was listed as honorary host. My name? Nowhere. I inhaled, slowly, trying to bury the sting behind my teeth. It wasn't new, but it still hurt like it had been rehearsed for months. Stepping inside was like walking into a parallel life. No one stopped me, maybe because I looked too determined to question, or maybe I just blended in with the hired help. The scent of fresh-cut orchids and polished wood wrapped around me. Music floated through the air, tuned strings, light warm-ups, and laughter that wasn't mine. The rehearsal was already underway. I slipped into a seat in the back row, unnoticed. Valora stood at the front, commanding attention like a conductor even without a baton. She wore a cream pantsuit, hair in a sleek chignon, voice smooth and assertive. If there was a spotlight in the room, she didn't need it. It followed her like a loyal pet. I could see it in the way the staff moved around her. Efficient, deferential, a little afraid. She was the daughter who stayed, the one who carried the torch, the one who gave interviews and smiled in photos while our father lay dying in a room I cleaned alone. My eyes drifted to the far end of the hall, where the Steinway Grand sat like a monument, black, gleaming, sacred. That piano knew things no one else did. Every lullaby, every scolding note, every silence my father had passed through when he could no longer speak. When the room turned momentarily chaotic, an AV issue or something, I stood. My feet moved before I could argue with them. I made my way down the side aisle, slow and quiet. The stage was still mostly empty, and the Steinway waited. I wasn't going to play it. I wasn't that foolish. I just wanted to touch it, maybe wipe the dust along its curved edge. Something soft, something that felt like permission. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth. Habit, not defiance. The moment my fingers grazed the wood, something in me softened. Then I heard her voice. "Excuse me?" Valora's heels clicked sharply across the stage. I straightened, cloth still in hand. "This isn't for failed musicians," she said, loud enough that every staff member and stagehand turned. "Dad wouldn't have wanted you touching that." The air turned razor sharp. I looked at her, stunned into stillness. There was no kindness in her face, only authority. Not even our mother, seated casually on a side chair, flinched. She chuckled softly, more to the woman beside her than to me. "She's just being dramatic," Isolde said, sipping white wine without looking up. Something hot and acidic climbed up my throat, but I swallowed it down. I nodded, stepped back, and left the stage without saying a word. Outside the rehearsal hall, I paced the hallway lined with black and white photos of past Haynes performances. Our father at age 27, conducting with a grin. Valora at 12, her fingers curled over piano keys in a spotlight. Me? I was in none of them. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. My chest hurt, not from embarrassment, but from the echo of every year spent trying to prove I still mattered. Dad once told me, when his hands started shaking too much to play, "Only keep playing if it still heals you, Becky. Don't let it turn into something that hurts." He didn't say that to Valora, just me. My hands, now older, tired, still remembered the rhythm of his advice. I reached into my bag and pulled out the note I had carried for years, folded, faded, torn at the top. My Juilliard acceptance letter. I had been 17. I had cried when I got it. Mom had read it silently, then said, "We're not funding fantasies." And with one firm pull, she tore it in half. I taped it back together. I kept it anyway. And now, here it was, creased, but whole enough. I ran my finger along the torn edge, heart thudding. I didn't come here to make a scene, but I wasn't going to let them erase me again. Not quietly. I tucked the letter back into my bag, smoothing it as if the paper would somehow forget the tear that defined it. Then I turned, quietly retracing my steps toward the hall. The echo of my own shoes on the marble felt too loud, too alone. Inside, the energy had shifted, not chaotic, but sharpened. Rehearsals had resumed. Musicians adjusted sheet music, and donors gathered in polished clusters near the refreshment tables. My mother stood at the center of one group, hand cupped gently around a glass of champagne. Her posture, as always, was deliberate, regal. She knew how to inhabit a room, not just stand in it. I paused near the threshold, debating whether to blend back into the shadows or risk being seen again. My feet made the decision for me. As I stepped fully into view, my eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. I searched for something, recognition, maybe even remorse. But all I got was a blink, a smile too quick to be genuine, and then she turned away, angling her body toward a well-dressed couple beside her. "She thinks she's special," she said, as if I were invisible. Valora was always the gifted one. The words dropped like stones into the champagne flutes around her. No one laughed, but no one corrected her either. I stood still for a moment too long, heat crawling up my neck. Then I turned away, walking with forced ease past them, pretending I hadn't heard, pretending it hadn't landed square in my chest. That's the thing about subtle cruelty. It wears the face of decorum, but it cuts just the same. As I drifted deeper into the hall, I noticed a makeshift gallery arranged along one wall. A timeline of my father's career stretched across black velvet panels, lined with spotlit photos. Some from his early days, grainy images of cramped stages and upright pianos. Others more recent, international performances, teaching workshops, awards. People stood quietly, admiring the collection like they were in a museum, as if these memories belonged to them. I walked slowly, scanning the images for something, some piece of proof I had existed in his story too. And then I saw it. It was a photo I remembered being in. We were at the lake house, Dad, Valora, and me. He had his arm around each of us, sun shining behind his thinning hair. I was wearing an oversized hoodie and holding a plastic cup of lemonade. I remembered because the hoodie was his, and it had smelled like cedar and coffee. But in this photo, I wasn't there. Valora stood on the left, Dad in the middle. The right side had been trimmed, the edge sharp, unnatural. I knew that crop. I'd made prints from that photo before. I could still see where the corner of my cup had been, just barely missed by the scissors. Someone had literally cut me out. I felt a twist deep in my gut. Not rage, not even grief. Just this cold, expanding emptiness, like a window had been opened behind me and all the warmth had rushed out. "You were in that one." The voice came softly, to my right. I turned to see an older man, gray at the temples, holding a staff badge clipped to his belt. I didn't recognize him at first, but his eyes were familiar, kind, quiet, the kind that remembered. "Stage manager," he said, sensing my confusion. "I worked with your dad on his last tour." My mouth went dry, but I nodded. "Thank you for saying that." He looked at the photo again, lips pressed thin. "You were always there," he said. "At rehearsals, backstage. I remember thinking you were the calm one." I let out a small, humorless breath. "Not enough to make the cut, apparently." He hesitated, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "I was told to keep certain faces off the tribute wall. That came from, well, higher up." He didn't say the names. He didn't have to. I smiled, but it was the kind that tried not to shatter. "Thanks," I said again. "That means more than you know." We stood there for another beat before he gave a polite nod and walked away. I lingered. My hand reached out, almost involuntarily, brushing the frame of the photo like I could will myself back into it. But nothing changed. No ghost of me appeared. The gallery told a curated story, one I had been carefully written out of. I moved on, back toward the stage. The piano sat there, unchanged, patient. Its lid was closed, the bench tucked in like it had been told to wait. I didn't play it. I hadn't played in years, not in front of anyone. But I walked up to it anyway, stood behind the bench, and placed my fingers lightly on the wood. It didn't ask for permission. Neither did I. My fingertips moved slowly across the surface, just feeling, just remembering. Someone behind me cleared their throat. I turned to see Valora at the microphone, preparing to rehearse her solo. She glanced at the photo wall, then back at me. And for the first time since I walked through those doors, her expression faltered. The sun had barely dipped when I left the Legacy Hall. Streetlights were starting to flicker on, casting a yellow hush over the sidewalks. I didn't bother calling for a rideshare. I needed to walk. Needed to let the ache of the evening settle into my bones, the way only cold air and tired shoes could allow. My apartment sat 6 blocks away, small, lived in, with an old radiator that huffed in protest when the heat kicked on. I liked the sound. It reminded me I still lived here, still had roots somewhere, even if they weren't visible to the family who edited me out of everything but memory. I turned the key quietly, stepped inside, and locked the door behind me. The silence was full, but not unfamiliar. I shrugged off my coat, slid my shoes by the wall, and lit the candle by the piano without flipping on the overhead light. The flame danced in the reflection of the dusty black keys. I hadn't touched that piano in years, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Not that anyone would pay much, it wasn't worth much on paper, but it held the weight of promises, even the broken ones. I changed into an old sweatshirt and soft socks, made a cup of peppermint tea, then sank into the small wooden chair beside the bench. There were still dents in the flooring where my father's chair used to rest when he visited. He'd sit quietly sometimes, not to instruct or critique, but to be near the music. That was before the tremor in his hand took over, before his voice thinned to air. The bag I'd brought from the hall sat on the floor beside me. I reached into it and pulled out the box labeled Dad's Notes. I hadn't opened it since he died. At the top, neatly stacked, concert programs, newspaper clippings, a photo of the two of us I'd never seen before. He was smiling. I wasn't. I looked mid-sentence, probably rambling about something he didn't quite follow, but pretended to. Then I found it. Beneath a worn, leather-bound folder, tucked almost like it was hiding, was the letter. Still folded, still jagged where the top had been torn. The envelope was long gone, and the crease lines were permanent now. But the words were clear. Juilliard School of Music. Full acceptance. Scholarship contingent upon enrollment by September 1st. I held it like it might disintegrate. The flashback came not as a memory, but as a sensation, tingling in my fingertips, that old surge of hope mixed with disbelief. I'd run up the stairs holding the envelope, my name bold in ink, my hands trembling. I remember my mother standing in the kitchen, drying a wine glass with the kind of care only rich women and bored housewives managed. I got in, I'd said, voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't look up. In where? Juilliard, I said, holding the paper toward her like it was proof that I existed. That was when she turned. Really turned. She set the glass down, took the letter from me, read it once, and then said, "We're not going to indulge delusions. Music doesn't pay rent, Rebecca." She never called me Becky when she was disappointed. I had tried to explain. There was a scholarship. It wouldn't cost her anything. It was real. But she didn't argue. She just tore it. Top to bottom. Right through my name. Valora had watched from the stairs. Said nothing. Just clutched the banister and looked at me like she pitied me. Like she didn't want to be in the same frame. I taped it back together that night. Sat on my bedroom floor with scotch tape and shaking fingers, pretending that the crease wasn't permanent. But the sound, the rip of potential sliced in half, that was the part I couldn't fix. Present-day me traced the tear again with the tip of my thumb. It wasn't just a letter she tore, It was my permission to believe I could be someone beyond the family photo albums and foundation committees. It was the version of me that played without apology. The girl who practiced until her wrists ached and still asked for one more round. I held the letter against my chest, let the paper warm against my skin. Outside, a car honked somewhere, and a dog barked in response. Life moving on. I stood, walked over to the bench, and placed the letter inside a folder marked Original Scores, Unfinished. Then I sat, slow and steady, on the bench itself. My hands hovered above the keys. I pressed down on one, a minor. The note rang out, clear and soft, like breath after holding it too long. Not loud, not bold, but present. I didn't cry. That part of me had long since dried out. Instead, I nodded to the air, to the memory of his voice, to the echo of that single torn moment. If no one ever gives you the stage, you build one. Valora turned away with that perfectly timed smirk of hers, the kind that didn't just say she won, it said no one else was even playing the same game. She adjusted the lapel of her blazer, then swept onto the stage, the documentary crew following like loyal shadows. The lights, the attention, the choreographed glances, it was all routine to her. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. I stood at the back of Legacy Hall, near the side entrance where staff came and went. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, bathing the polished floor in amber. The place smelled like citrus polish and anticipation. Every movement around me buzzed with purpose. Caterers rushing platters into the kitchen, florists adjusting arrangements taller than toddlers, and interns sprinting between sound checks and last-minute adjustments to the seating chart. And me? I blended in like wallpaper. The tech crew walked right past without so much as a nod. One of them nearly bumped into me while adjusting a cable, but offered no apology. It wasn't malicious. They didn't see me. I wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't in the plan. Across the room, I watched as my mother sat upright in a plush velvet chair near the front of the hall, having her microphone tested. Isolde always wore navy to formal events. Not black, not gray, navy. Authority without mourning. Control disguised as poise. She spoke softly to the young man wiring her collar, her tone clipped but smooth. Valora stood beside her, scrolling through her phone. Occasionally, she'd glance up and offer a performance-ready smile to whoever passed, like she was rehearsing for her acceptance speech. She always was. The event's MC, a lean man in his 40s with a theater voice and plastic enthusiasm, tapped the microphone at center stage. "All right, folks," he called out. "Before doors open to the public, we're going to run through the family spotlight remarks." I stayed behind a pillar, unseen. The lights dimmed slightly as the MC's voice filled the space again, smoother this time. As many of you know, this event isn't just about honoring a legacy, it's about continuing one. And there's no better person to speak on that than Mrs. Isolde Haynes, the heart of the Haynes family and the inspiration behind this evening. Polite applause followed. The mic squeaked once as my mother stood and approached it. "Thank you," she began, voice unwavering. "It means the world to see so many of you here, carrying forward a passion my husband poured his life into." She gestured toward Valora without turning. "Our daughter Valora," she continued, "was always the one with the gift. Even when she was 5, she could mimic her father's phrasing by ear. We used to joke she inherited more than his name. She inherited his soul." A few soft chuckles drifted through the air. Valora dipped her head modestly, playing her role. "And Rebecca?" My mother paused just long enough to sharpen the blade. "Well, she tried. She didn't quite have the spark, but she loved being around the music. That counts for something." Laughter stuttered into silence. The MC gave a small, tight smile. I couldn't tell if he was uncomfortable or just unsure whether he was supposed to respond. My jaw tightened. My hands curled at my sides, fingernails pressing crescents into my palm. I didn't storm out. I didn't interrupt. I just stood there, absorbing every syllable like acid slowly eating through fabric. Because that was the truth she had written into the family mythology. Valora, the prodigy. Becky, the background noise. They moved on to the tribute videos, playing them on a large screen mounted center stage, a montage of my father's life, from sepia-toned recitals in college to sweeping shots of packed concert halls in Vienna. There were family photos, too, vacations, candid moments backstage, birthday cakes lit with too many candles. Not once did my face appear. One frame held a scene I remembered clearly. It was from a festival in upstate New York. I had been 15. Dad had let me sit in during rehearsal, playing a simplified harmony. Afterward, he took a picture with both of us side by side, Valora holding her violin, me behind the keyboard. But in this edit, it was just him and Valora. My arm had been cropped out, but not carefully. You could still see the outline of my sleeve near the margin, like a ghost who hadn't fully left the frame. "Weren't there 2 daughters?" a woman whispered behind me. Another voice answered, casual but confident, "Only one that mattered." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see their faces. I moved away from the crowd and found a corner near the reception table where water glasses sat untouched. A child's giggle drew my attention. Finn, my sister's 8-year-old son, stood next to another little boy near the edge of the stage. He pointed toward me, whispering too loudly. "She's not really part of the family," he said. "That's what Nana told me." His friend looked at me, then at him. "But she's at the concert," Finn shrugged. "She always shows up. She just doesn't belong." I looked down. My breath caught somewhere between shame and fury. I wasn't mad at Finn, he was just repeating what he'd been told. But hearing it from a child made it worse. It meant the lie had grown legs. It meant the silence had become inheritance. Backstage, I found a napkin, just a plain white square, and borrowed a pen from the check-in table. I didn't plan to say anything dramatic, just 6 words. "You erased me." But music remembers. I walked up to the stage like I was checking the piano's polish. No one paid me any mind. My fingers lifted the lid, and I slid the napkin gently beneath it, tucking the corner just out of view. I didn't know if anyone would find it. That wasn't the point. As I turned to walk away, I nearly bumped into Valora. Her smile was tight, tired. "Don't make a scene tonight, Becky," she whispered. "This isn't your moment." I met her gaze without blinking. She didn't flinch, but her jaw clenched. She didn't know. I had already decided to make it mine. The hours before an event like this always moved strangely. They didn't tick by. They folded into themselves. I could feel it happening as I walked slowly down the back corridor of Legacy Hall, trying to stay invisible, but not hiding. I didn't have to be seen just yet. I only had to be there. I turned the corner near the rehearsal room. That's when I heard her voice. "Valora." "Right after my speech," she was saying. "That's when I want it played. Dad's final piece. It'll be the perfect close." I froze just beyond the open doorway. Her back was to me, but the words were sharp and deliberate. She was handing a USB drive to one of the sound technicians, smiling like this was just another detail on her to-do list. The young man nodded, taking it without question, and placed it near the laptop controlling the event playlist. I didn't have to guess what was on that drive. I knew that melody, every note, because it was mine. She had taken the lullaby I wrote with Dad during his final weeks, those evenings when he could barely speak but still hummed. That song, stitched together in a hospital room, lit by the hum of fluorescent lights, the one I played softly into his hand when he couldn't sleep. And now she was claiming it, in front of everyone, without blinking. I stood still a moment longer, then stepped back into the shadows and circled the opposite hallway until I found her alone, near the dressing room. She was reapplying lipstick, not out of need, but performance. She saw me in the mirror and didn't flinch. "You're not just stealing notes," I said, keeping my voice level. "You're stealing history." She capped the lipstick and turned. "You always make things so emotional, Becky," she replied. "It's just a song." "It was ours, mine and Dad's." Valora shrugged, smooth as glass. "No one remembers you played. They remember him, and they remember me." I stepped closer. "If you lie again on stage," I said, "I won't stay silent." For a beat, she didn't answer. Then she smiled, a quiet, practiced smirk. "You won't get the chance." She walked away without waiting for me to respond. Later, during the catering setup, I helped myself to a glass of ginger water and tried to keep moving. The pain started suddenly, low, insistent, and far too familiar. My stomach cramped, a sharp curl pulling me forward. I leaned against the wall, breath caught in my throat. Endometriosis didn't care about timing or humiliation. I tried to excuse myself, slipping behind one of the partitions, but I didn't get far before someone noticed. "There she goes again," Valora called out across the room. "Can't stand not being the center of attention." Some of the staff looked up. A violinist paused mid-rosin. "She's just a leech," Valora continued, louder. "Can't keep a job, but somehow always finds a way to play the victim. It's exhausting." No one said a word. No one stepped in. I didn't try to argue. I didn't have the energy. I slipped out the side door, one hand on the wall, the other holding my stomach. I made it to the far hallway, out of sight. I pressed my back against the cool marble, closed my eyes, and focused on breathing. After a few minutes, when the pain dulled into a deep throb, I pulled my phone from my pocket. Scrolling past missed texts and event emails, I found the voice memo I'd saved but never shared. The first few notes of the lullaby played, followed by my voice, low and a little off-key, humming. In the background, you could hear Dad's breathing, slow, labored, but alive. He hummed the last bar with me, just before the recording ended. I texted the file to one contact, Luther Maddox. I didn't add a message. He'd understand. By evening, the hall had transformed. Chairs were lined in perfect rows, candles flickered in glass cylinders down the aisle, and the sound check buzzed with quiet urgency. I arrived early, wearing the same black dress I wore to Dad's funeral. It still fit, somehow. In my purse, I carried a folder, the original score of the piece Valora had claimed. My initials were in the top corner, dated 3 months before Dad passed. No one greeted me as I walked through the main auditorium. No one stopped me either. I made my way to the sound booth. The technician from earlier was checking cables. I approached him, gently placed the folder in the tray beside the console, and leaned in. "Play the truth," I said. He glanced at me, unsure, then opened the folder and read the top page. He looked up again, nodding slightly. As I walked away, Valora passed me on her way to the front row. She wore a navy gown, hair styled to perfection. Cameras turned toward her, flashes popping like applause. She smiled wide, teeth perfect, eyes sharp. But something flickered behind that gaze. She knew. Something had shifted. She posed with ease, smiling for the photographers as if the weight of the entire evening rested lightly on her shoulders. Her expression didn't crack, not even for a second, but I caught something in her eyes when she glanced past the lens and saw me. I didn't return the look. I kept walking. Backstage, the buzz was different now. Not chaotic, still polished, still scripted, but the edges had dulled. People were moving slower, checking their notes, sipping water, waiting. There's a quiet that settles over a theater just before the house lights go down. A silence full of breath being held. I found a spot near the curtain, just out of the wings, the same place I used to watch from when I was a teenager, before recitals, before fundraisers, before the version of our family that the press knew existed. My fingers twitched like they were already on the keys. I clenched my fists, then opened them again. Not fear, focus. I heard the door near the back open and close. Luther's voice, low and calm, talking to the sound technician. I didn't move, didn't need to. I trusted him. He'd know when, and what. From where I stood, I watched him lean in and whisper something. Then he placed a small cassette deck on the soundboard, old, worn, almost ridiculous in a room filled with state-of-the-art tech. But it was real. And it was enough. Luther turned his head slightly until he found me in the shadows. I mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." The cue lights changed. Murmurs faded. And then the MC's voice echoed out through the speakers, cheerful but rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor the legacy of an extraordinary man, a teacher, a father, and an artist whose music shaped a generation." Polite applause. A few respectful nods. "And to close our program," he continued, "we invite you to experience what the family has described as his final gift, an original piece composed before his passing, performed tonight in his memory." Please welcome Valora Haynes. Spotlight. Applause. She rose gracefully from her seat, gathered the fabric of her gown, and ascended the stage steps like she'd been born there. Thank you, Valora said into the microphone, her voice warm, practiced. This evening is deeply personal for us. For me. She placed a hand on her chest, pausing just long enough for the camera flash. My father was everything to me, mentor, muse, anchor, and in the final months of his life, he shared something rare, a melody, a message. We worked on it together, and tonight it's my honor to share that message with all of you. She turned slightly to nod at the pianist seated behind the Steinway. The house dimmed. The silence deepened. I stepped out of the wings, not fast, not dramatic, just deliberate. There was a pause, not long enough for Valora to stop me without making a scene, but long enough for the audience to shift, to murmur. I walked to the front of the stage, gently touched the microphone, and spoke softly. That's not the final piece. Valora turned toward me, frozen. I continued. It's mine. I wrote it. With him. In the hospital. On the nights when he couldn't speak, but still hummed. Gasps. Whispered questions. I reached into my folder and held up the original score. My name. My father's notes. The date. Valora didn't say a word. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. From the booth, the sound tech looked toward Luther. He nodded once. Then he pressed play. At first, nothing. Then a soft click, followed by a breath, and then his voice. Becky, she listens like no one else. A pause. This piece, we're writing it together. That was it. No performance. No rehearsed lines. Just his voice, frail but clear. No one else in that room could argue with it. The silence that followed was louder than any standing ovation. I walked slowly to the Steinway. The pianist had already stood and stepped aside. I sat. The keys were familiar, but not forgiving. I hadn't played in front of people in years. My hands hovered for a moment, then fell. The first note, soft, a minor, honest. Then the second chord, the one we had revised 5 times in that hospital room, the one he said felt too heavy until it didn't anymore. And that's when I heard it. A quiet shift behind me. I didn't turn around, but I knew. Valora had stepped back, maybe stumbled. I kept playing. The piece wasn't perfect. It was raw, stitched together with grief and silence. It wavered once, nearly broke in the bridge, but it lived. And when I played the final note, just a whisper of sound, I let it hang. Not rushed, not forced. I lifted my hands from the keys. The room didn't clap, it exhaled. By the time the house lights brightened and the ushers started clearing out the final clusters of guests, my body still hadn't caught up to what had happened. I sat in the green room alone, legs crossed, palms resting flat on the surface of my knees to steady the tremor that hadn't stopped since I played the final note. My fingers still remembered every vibration of the Steinway, but my mind couldn't quite decide if it had really happened or if I'd conjured it up. The applause never came, but neither did the rejection, and sometimes silence was the louder truth. The door slammed open without warning. Valora stormed in, heels clicking like weapons against the floor. She didn't close the door behind her. She didn't need to. Her anger filled every square inch of the room. You think a dusty cassette and a sob story make you relevant again? Her voice sliced the air like she'd been rehearsing the lines since I stepped on stage. Her face was tight, not with tears, not even regret, but fury, not just at me, but at the shift she felt under her feet. I stood up slowly, calmly. I didn't need to match her energy. I just needed to meet it. No, I said. But the music did, and that's enough. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. Maybe she expected me to cry, to fold, to explain. But I wasn't 13 anymore, begging to keep a piano lesson. I walked past her without touching her, without giving her the dignity of another glance. Outside the dressing rooms, the lobby had changed. Not physically. Everything still glowed in soft amber tones. The scent of orchids lingered, and waiters were still offering flutes of champagne. But the atmosphere had shifted. People moved slower now. They were whispering more than smiling. And phones. Phones were everywhere. Someone had live-streamed the entire moment. I caught a glimpse of the screen on a guest's phone. Me, on stage, holding the score in one hand and the mic in the other. My father's voice crackling through the speakers. The moment the room stilled, the caption beneath it, "She played the truth." As I walked toward the exit, I passed a small group of guests whispering near the coat check. "That was her piece?" one woman asked. "The one Valora said was hers?" "She said she wrote it with him," another added. "Well," the first replied, "guess that wasn't the whole story." I didn't stop. I didn't correct them or gloat. I just walked out into the night, letting the air hit my skin like a rinse after fire. 10 minutes later, I was back in my apartment, barefoot, glass of water in hand. I sat on the couch, phone in my lap, trying to decide whether to look. I tapped the notification icon. The video had over 200,000 views. Comments scrolled faster than I could read. That was her song. Valora lied. Who is Becky Draper? She's the one who felt it. You could hear it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt recognized, not celebrated, not famous, but seen, and that would have been enough. Until the next ping, I glanced down. A breaking news tweet, posted by a local arts journalist. Sources confirm Caleb Forrester, former partner of Valora Haynes, has verified that the gala piece performed tonight was not written by Haynes. My breath hitched. I tapped again. There he was, Caleb, for the first time in a decade, speaking to a journalist outside the venue. The video quality was shaky, but his voice was clear. "I heard Becky play that melody months before Valora ever mentioned it," he said. "I was there, in the hospital. She was humming it while her dad tapped the rhythm on the bedrail. Valora didn't even show up until the final week." The interviewer asked if Valora had lied. Caleb shrugged. "She said she tweaked it, but claiming authorship? That wasn't editing, that was erasing." I stared at the screen, heart pounding, not because I needed validation, but because someone else had finally said it out loud. And then another notification came in. Luther Maddox had given an on-camera interview with a music blog. "The only reason I came tonight," he said, eyes tired but bright, "was because of Becky. She's the last thread to that man's heart. I've known that since she was 15. He held up the score. "This," he said, tapping it, "this is dated. It's signed. It's hers." The floodgates opened. Comments, articles, think pieces, forum threads dissecting the performance, the audio, even the body language on stage. I sat in silence, watching the story stretch across feeds and platforms faster than I could process it. And then Valora struck back. A new video dropped at midnight. The thumbnail showed her sitting at a dimly lit vanity, no makeup, hair pulled back, silk robe. Soft piano music played underneath. Aesthetic perfection. "I wasn't going to respond," she began. "But when someone you once trusted uses your grief to feed their ego..." She looked at the camera, voice low and smooth. "Becky Draper is a bitter little liar with a cassette player and a vendetta. My father didn't write that piece with her. He wrote it for me. He told me so, and I don't need papers or recordings to prove what I felt." She paused. "Because love doesn't need signatures." The video ended with a fade-out and a title card reading, "This is my truth." I watched it 3 times. Then I turned off my phone and cried. Not because she hurt me, but because I wasn't surprised. This was the playbook. Rewrite, retaliate, reframe. But I wasn't done. I opened a new message to Luther, not surprised, but I'm not backing down either. Then I checked my inbox. The top email caught my eye. Subject: NPR interview request. Your second chord broke the silence. I read it twice, and for the first time, they were asking to hear from me, not about her. The request came through Luther, not a forwarded email or a clipped phone call. He knocked on my apartment door the next morning, holding a printed letter and a coffee, as if that was how invitations to national radio shows usually arrived. "NPR wants to talk to you," he said, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table. I hadn't even combed my hair. The heat from the coffee fogged my glasses slightly, and still, I couldn't bring myself to say anything for a moment. "They want to know what you have to say," Luther added gently. "And this time, you get to say it without anyone interrupting." I accepted the offer that afternoon. And 1 week later, I sat in a small recording studio in New York, headphones over my ears, a steaming mug of tea in my hand. The studio smelled faintly of pencil shavings and old vinyl, familiar in a way I didn't expect. Across from me, the host, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a calming presence, smiled and leaned slightly forward. "So, Becky," she began, "why now?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the tea for a second longer, then met her gaze. "I didn't want a spotlight," I said. "I just didn't want to be erased." We talked for 30 minutes. I shared stories of my father, of the music we made in the shadows of his decline. I explained how grief, for me, came out in chords and pauses, not speeches. When she asked about the piece I played at the gala, I let the silence sit for a beat longer before responding. "That piece," I said, "wasn't written for an audience. It was written to remember someone who stopped speaking, but never stopped listening." When she asked what I would say to my mother and Valora if they were listening, I paused again. "I don't speak for them," I said. "I play for the part of me they couldn't silence." The room went still. Even in a recording booth, you can feel when the air changes. It's the difference between noise and weight. I didn't need applause this time. The moment was already whole. The interview aired the following Tuesday. By Wednesday, it had been clipped and shared across a dozen platforms. The quote about not being silenced spread like fire. "I play for the part of me they couldn't silence" ended up on quote boards, arts blogs, and even in a tweet from a famous conductor. He wrote, "Becky Draper's performance reminded us what real music sounds like, unfiltered, unsponsored." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. Instead, I spent that afternoon folding laundry and answering 3 emails from strangers, young musicians, mostly women, saying thank you. The next call came from the board of the Haynes Legacy Fund. It was an email, formal and dry, inviting me to attend their quarterly meeting to discuss programmatic direction and future artistic representation. In short, damage control. I arrived at the foundation's offices the following Friday. Valora was already seated at the long conference table. Her face was composed, but her jaw clenched slightly every time someone said my name. Isolde was there too, sitting near the back, silent, her eyes fixed on the center of the table, as if she was trying not to exist in the moment. I didn't dress for battle, just a gray cardigan and black slacks. I didn't come to fight. I came to be present. After the usual procedural nonsense, the chairman, a man named Alan who wore bow ties like armor, cleared his throat and turned to me. "Missy?" "Draper," he said, "the board would like to offer you a role on our mentorship committee to guide young musicians and contribute to our artistic outreach." Valora shifted in her seat. "You're offering her a vote?" Alan didn't look at her. "We're offering her a voice. She doesn't understand the operations," Valora said. "She's not qualified to—" "Valora," Alan interrupted, calm but firm. "This isn't a debate. You've spoken. Now it's Becky's turn." All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, adjusting my cardigan as I did. My hands weren't shaking. "I don't want control," I said. "I'm not here to rewrite anything." I looked around the room, meeting every gaze, even Isolde's. "I want kids like me to know they don't need permission to be brilliant. That's it. I don't care if my name goes on a brochure or a banner. I just want one girl sitting in a quiet bedroom somewhere, writing music into the dark, to know that her voice matters. Even if no one claps." For a second, there was silence. Then a soft rustle, a nod. Someone wiped their eye. Even Alan blinked faster than usual. Valora said nothing. She stood and walked out, her heels muted against the carpet. Isolde stayed a moment longer, then followed. She didn't look back, but someone else stayed behind. A girl, 17, maybe. clearly one of the program's student volunteers. She hovered at the edge of the room, clutching a folder to her chest. As I stepped out into the hallway, she followed quietly. "Miss Draper?" she said. I turned. "I just wanted to say, I watched your performance online," she said. "And I showed it to my mom. She cried." I smiled. "That means more than you know." She hesitated, then reached into her bag. "Would you mind signing this? Not because you're famous or anything. Just, you kind of look like me." That was the moment that undid me. Not the gala, not the broadcast, not the boardroom. Her. I took the folder, signed my name, and gave it back. "Keep playing," I told her. She nodded and walked away. The photo I took with that student, no makeup, no posing, no pretense, ended up framed on the bookshelf beside my keyboard. I didn't ask her name at the time, but she had said it so simply, so honestly. "You kind of look like me." And somehow, that was more healing than 1,000 standing ovations. 3 months had passed since the interview aired. Since then, life hadn't become glamorous. It became quieter, and in that quiet, I built something. Not a comeback, not a revenge story, just a space, a room for the uninvited. On Monday and Wednesday afternoons, I taught beginner piano classes at the East Side Community Music Center. The building used to be a grocery store, repurposed by a group of retired musicians and volunteers who wanted to give kids a place to explore sound without cost or competition. They didn't care about resumes or conservatory pedigrees, just whether you were willing to show up. I always showed up. The studio walls were plastered with hand-drawn posters, notes written in crayon, and faded Polaroids from past recitals. The piano we used was slightly out of tune, but it had personality, and most days, that mattered more than perfection. It was mid-September when I met Ruby. The class had just ended, and most of the kids had already rushed out, chasing each other across the tiled lobby, snack wrappers crinkling in their hands. I was packing up my materials when I noticed her still seated at the bench, staring down at the keys as if they might start playing on their own. "You okay?" I asked gently. She nodded, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a sketch pad. On the top page was a drawing of piano keys, meticulously shaded, labeled with note names, and surrounded by tiny musical symbols like constellations. "I draw the songs before I try to play them," she said, not quite looking at me. "That's a smart way to learn," I said, crouching beside her. "You understand how they move before your fingers touch them." "My mom said you played real," Ruby whispered. "Not perfect. That's why I wanted to come." I didn't know how to respond to that. So I didn't. I just waited. She said when people play like that, it means they remember something. Like it's coming from somewhere else. Her voice dropped even lower. "You remind me of my aunt. She used to play too. She stopped because nobody listened." That cracked something in me, not with bitterness, with recognition. I sat next to her and nodded slowly. "Sometimes," I said, "people don't clap for the truth, but they remember it. That's what matters." Ruby folded her sketchpad and slid it back into her bag, eyes still wide, but no longer unsure. When she left, I stayed behind. I always did. At home that night, I checked my inbox, half expecting another article, another interview request, another invitation. There were none. And for the first time, I felt relief instead of panic. Scrolling through my news app, I saw a headline tucked between election polls and a feel-good animal rescue story. Haynes Foundation Director Valora Haynes steps down, cites personal reassessment. There was no mention of me, no quotes. Just a brief note about her resignation and the board's plan to restructure programming in the spring. Isolde had not called. No email, no apology, nothing. I hovered over her contact in my phone for a long moment. Then I deleted it. Valora's too. But I didn't erase everything. The cassette tape still sat in my drawer, tucked beneath a stack of sheet music I hadn't touched since the performance. I didn't keep it for proof. I kept it because it was the last thing my father said that wasn't to the world. It was to me. A week later, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, but the seal was embossed with the emblem of Juilliard. I opened it slowly, cautiously, like the letter might disappear if I moved too fast. Inside was an invitation. They were hosting a spring masterclass series and wanted me to guest teach one of the sessions, Legacy and Emotion in Contemporary Composition. I didn't cry. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a simple silver frame. Then I set it on the shelf beside the cassette tape. That weekend, I returned to the studio alone, cleaned the keys, and added something new above the piano. A small plaque, etched with a phrase I had written on a napkin months before and tucked beneath a Steinway in a hall that didn't welcome me. For those who were never invited, make your own room. A week later, Ruby returned early for class. She waited quietly at the door until I waved her in. "Want to start with scales or with your song?" I asked. She thought for a moment, then walked to the bench. "I want to show you something first," she said. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, not all of them in the right place, not all of them steady, but with intention. She pressed one note, a minor, the same note I had played on a dusty piano in my apartment after reading a torn letter that should have opened a door. She looked at me, shy and proud. "This one's for you." Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that tells the truth. It's the one that refuses to stay quiet any longer. Becky's story is a reminder that even when you're written out of the picture, you can still reclaim your place, not by demanding it, but by creating something too honest to ignore. Have you ever felt silenced by your own family? What would you do if your truth was taken from you? If this story resonated with you, drop a comment and let us know. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, human stories that deserve to be heard.